Snow lay deep in the streets of Winesburg. It had begun to snow about 10 o'clock in the morning, and a wind sprang up and blew the snow in clouds along Main Street. The frozen mud roads that led into town were fairly smooth, and in places ice covered the mud. The young reporter was thinking of Kate Swift, who had once been his schoolteacher. On the evening before, he had gone to her house to get a book she wanted him to read, and had been alone with her for an hour. For the fourth or fifth time the woman had talked to him with great earnestness, and he could not make out what she meant by her talk. He began to believe she must be in love with him, and the thought was both pleasing and annoying. By 9 o'clock of that evening, snow lay deep in the streets, and the weather had become bitter cold. It was difficult to walk about. By 10 o'clock, all but 4 of the 1,800 citizens of the town were in bed. On the winter night when Kate Swift walked through the deserted, snow-covered streets, a crisis had come into the life of the schoolteacher. Day by day, as she worked in the schoolroom or walked in the streets, grief, hope, and desire fought within her. Behind a cold exterior, the most extraordinary events transpired in her mind. Kate Swift's mind was ablaze with thoughts of George Willard. On the night of the storm, Kate Swift went to the office of the Winesburg Eagle, intending to have another talk with the boy. After the long walk in the snow, she was cold, lonely, and tired. As she came through Main Street, she saw the light from the print shop window shining on the snow, and on an impulse opened the door and went in. A great eagerness to open the door of life to the boy, who had been her pupil and who she thought might possess a talent for the understanding of life, had possession of her. In the newspaper office, a confusion arose. Kate Swift turned and walked to the door. She was a teacher, but she was also a woman. As she looked at George Willard, the passionate desire to be loved by a man, that had 1,000 times before swept like a storm over her body, took possession of her. In the lamplight, George Willard looked no longer a boy, but a man ready to play the part of a man. The schoolteacher let George Willard take her into his arms. He put a hand on her shoulder. She turned and let her body fall heavily against him. For George Willard, the confusion was immediately increased. For a moment he held the body of the woman tightly against his body, and then it stiffened. 2 sharp little fists began to beat on his face. When the schoolteacher had run away and left him alone, he walked up and down the office, swearing furiously. When he finally got into bed, the sheets were like blankets of dry snow. Hours passed, and he began to think it must be time for another day to come. At 4 o'clock he pulled the covers up about his neck and tried to sleep. When he became drowsy and closed his eyes, he raised a hand and with it groped about in the darkness. "I have missed something. I have missed something Kate Swift was trying to tell me.